Ukraine, Ukrainian, Ukraina, Romanized, Ukraina, pronounced Krin, listen, is a country in Eastern Europe. It is the second largest European country, covering approximately 600,000 square kilometers, 230,000 square miles, and has a population of around 40 million people. It is bordered by Russia to the east and northeast, by Belarus to the north, by Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary to the west, and by Romania and Moldova to the southwest, with a coastline along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov to the south and southeast, respectively. Kiev is Ukraine's capital as well as its largest city. The country's language is Ukrainian, and many people are also fluent in Russian. During the Middle Ages, the area was a key center of East Slavic culture under the state of Kievan Roose, which emerged in the 9th century and was destroyed by a Mongol invasion in the 13th century. Over the next 600 years, the area was contested, divided, and ruled by a variety of external powers, including the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Austrian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Tsardom of Russia. The Cossack Hetmanate emerged in central Ukraine in the 17th century, but was partitioned between Russia and Poland, and ultimately completely into the Russian Empire. Ukrainian nationalism grew in the 19th century, particularly in Galicia, a kingdom within Austria-Hungary. In the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, a Ukrainian national movement re-emerged, and formed the Ukrainian People's Republic in 1917. This short-lived state was forcibly reconstituted by the Bolsheviks into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which became a founding member of the Soviet Union in 1922. In the 1930s, millions of Ukrainians were killed by the Holodomor, a man-made famine of the Stalinist era. In 1939, with the secret agreement of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union invaded and annexed lands with predominant Ukrainian population from Poland to Western Ukraine. Between 1922 and 1991, Ukraine was the most populous and industrialized Soviet republic after Russia. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine regained its independence, and has since been governed as a unitary republic under a semi-presidential system. Shortly after becoming one of the post-Soviet states, it declared itself neutral, forming a limited military partnership with Russia and the rest of the post-Soviet Commonwealth of independent states, while also joining the Partnership for Peace with NATO in 1994. In 2013, a series of mass protests and demonstrations known as the Euromaidan erupted across Ukraine, eventually escalating into the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, which led to the establishment of a new government amidst a notable outbreak of pro-Russia unrest across Ukraine. During this period, unmarked Russian troops invaded the Crimean Peninsula, which was later annexed by Russia, and pro-Russia unrest in Ukraine's Donbas culminated in Russia-backed separatists seizing territory throughout the region, sparking the war in Donbas. This series of events marked the beginning of the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War, and in a major escalation of the conflict in February 2022. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Since the outbreak of war with Russia in 2014, Ukraine has continued to seek closer economic, political, and military ties with the Western world, including the European Union and NATO. Ukraine is among the poorest countries in Europe and also suffers from widespread corruption. However, due to its extensive fertile land, Pre-war Ukraine was one of the largest grain exporters in the world. It is a member state of the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, the Guam Organization, the Association Trio, and the Lublin Triangle. Etymology and orthography. There are different hypotheses as to the etymological origins of the name of Ukraine. The most widespread hypothesis theorizes that it comes from the Old Slavic term for borderland, as does the word Krajina. During most of the 20th century, Ukraine, whether independent or not, was referred to in the English-speaking world prefaced with the definite article, i.e., the Ukraine. This is because the word Ukraina means borderland, and so an article would be natural in the English language. This is similar to Nederlanden, which means lowlands and is rendered in English as the Netherlands. However, since Ukraine's declaration of independence in 1991, the use of the definite article in the name has become politicized and is now rarer, and style guides advise against its use. According to U.S. Ambassador William Taylor, as of the 2010s, using the Ukraine implies disregard for Ukrainian sovereignty. The official Ukrainian position is that the Ukraine is incorrect, both grammatically and politically. History. Early history. Settlement by modern humans in Ukraine and its vicinity dates back to 32,000 BC, with evidence of the Gravitian culture in the Crimean Mountains. By 4500 BC, the Neolithic Cucuteni Tripilia culture was flourishing in wide areas of modern Ukraine, including Tripilia and the entire Dnieper-Dniester region. Ukraine is also considered to be the likely location of the first domestication of the horse. During the Iron Age, the land was inhabited by Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians. Between 700 BC and 200 BC it was part of the Scythian kingdom. From the 6th century BC, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine colonies were established on the northeastern shore of the Black Sea, such as at Tyras, Olbia, and Chersonesus. These thrived into the 6th century AD. The Goths stayed in the area, but came under the sway of the Huns from the 370s. In the 7th century, the territory that is now eastern Ukraine was the center of Old Great Bulgaria. At the end of the century, the majority of Bulgar tribes migrated in different directions, and the Khazars took over much of the land. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the early Slavic, Antes people lived in Ukraine. The Antes were the ancestors of Ukrainians, White Croats, Severians, Eastern Polans, Drevlians, Dulebs, Ulichians, and Tiverians. Migrations from the territories of present-day Ukraine throughout the Balkans established many South Slavic nations. Northern migrations, reaching almost to Lake Ilmen, led to the emergence of the Ilmen Slavs, Kriviches, and Radomiches, the groups ancestral to the Russians. Following an Avar raid in 602 and the collapse of the Antes Union, most of these peoples survived as separate tribes until the beginning of the second millennium. Golden Age of Kiev. The establishment of the Kievan Rus remains obscure and uncertain. There are at least 3 versions depending on interpretations of the chronicles. In general, the state included much of present-day Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. According to the primary chronicle, the Rus elite and rulers initially consisted of Varangians from Scandinavia. In 882, the pagan prince Oleg, Ole, conquered Kiev from Ascod and Deir and proclaimed it as the capital of the Rus. However, it also believed that the East Slavic tribes along the southern parts of the Dnieper River were already in the process of forming a state independently. During the 10th and 11th centuries, Kievan Rus became the largest and most powerful state in Europe. The Varangians later assimilated into the Slavic population and became part of the First Rus dynasty, the Rurik dynasty. Kievan Rus was composed of several principalities ruled by the interrelated Rurikid Nyazes, princes, who often fought each other for possession of Kiev. The Golden Age of Kievan Rus began with the reign of Vladimir the Great, 980–1015, who turned Rus toward Byzantine Christianity. During the reign of his son, Yaroslav the Wise, 1019–1054, Kievan Rus reached the zenith of its cultural development and military power. The state soon fragmented as the relative importance of regional powers rose again. After a final resurgence under the rule of Vladimir II Monomach, 1113–1125, and his son Mstislav, 1125–1132, Kievan Rus finally disintegrated into separate principalities following Mstyliv's death. The 13th-century Mongol invasion devastated Kievan Rus and Kiev was completely destroyed in 1240. On today's Ukrainian territory, the principalities of Halych and Volodymyr Volhynsky arose, and were merged into the state of Galicia-Volhynia. Daniel of Galicia, son of Roman the Great, reunited much of southwestern Rus, including Volhynia, Galicia and the ancient capital of Kiev. He was subsequently crowned by the papal archbishop as the first king of the newly created kingdom of Ruthenia in 1253. Foreign domination. In 1349, Ruthenia ceased to exist as an independent entity in the aftermath of the Galicia-Volhynia Wars, with its lands partitioned between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. From the mid-13th century to the late 1400s, the Republic of Genoa founded numerous colonies in the Black Sea region of modern Ukraine and transformed these into large commercial centers headed by the consul, a representative of the Republic. In 1430, the region of Podolia was incorporated into Poland and Ukraine became increasingly settled by Polish colonizers. In 1441, Genghis Prince Hachi I Giri founded the Crimean Khanate on the Crimean Peninsula and the surrounding steppes. The Khanate orchestrated Tatar slave raids and took an estimated 2 million Ruthenian slaves. In 1569, the Union of Lublin established the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and most of the former Ruthenian lands were transferred from Lithuania to the Crown of the Kingdom of Poland, becoming de jure Polish territory. Under the pressures of Polonization, many landed gentry of Ruthenia converted to Catholicism and joined the circles of the Polish nobility. Deprived of native protectors among Rus nobility, the peasants and townspeople began turning for protection to the emerging Zaporozhian Cossacks. In the mid-17th century, a Cossack military quasi-state, the Zaporozhian host, was formed by Dnieper Cossacks and Ruthenian peasants. Poland exercised little real control over this population, but found the Cossacks to be useful against the Turks and Tatars, and at times the two were allies in military campaigns. However, the continued harsh ensifment of Ruthenian peasantry by Polish overlords and the suppression of the Orthodox Church alienated the Cossacks. The Cossacks did not shy from taking up arms against those they perceived as enemies and occupiers, including the Polish Catholic state with its local representatives. Cossack Hetmanate. In 1648, Bohdan Khmelnytsky led the largest of the Cossack uprisings against the Commonwealth and the Polish king. After Khmelnytsky made an entry into Kiev in 1648, where he was hailed liberator of the people from Polish captivity, he founded the Cossack Hetmanate, which existed until 1764. Some sources claim until 1782. After Khmelnytsky suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Berestechko in 1651, he turned to the Russian Tsar for help. In 1654, Khmelnytsky was subject to the Pereyaslav Council, forming a military and political alliance with Russia that acknowledged loyalty to the Russian monarch. In the period 1657 to 1686 came the ruin. A devastating 30-year war amongst Russia, Poland, the Crimean Khanate, the Ottoman Empire, and Cossacks for control of the Cossack Hetmanate. The wars escalated in intensity with hundreds of thousands of deaths. The Treaty of Perpetual Peace between Russia and Poland in 1686 divided the lands of the Cossack Hetmanate between them, reducing the portion over which Poland had claimed sovereignty. In 1686, the Metropolitanate of Kiev was annexed by the Moscow Patriarchate through a synodal letter of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople Dionysius IV, thus placing the Metropolitanate of Kiev under the authority of Moscow. In 1709, Cossack hetman Ivan Mazepa (1639–1709) defected to Sweden against Russia in the Great Northern War, 1700–1721. Eventually Tsar Peter recognized that to consolidate and modernize Russia's political and economic power it was necessary to do away with the Cossack hetmanate as well as the Ukrainian and Cossack aspirations to autonomy. Mazepa died in exile after fleeing from the Battle of Poltava, 1709, in which the Swedes and their Cossack allies suffered a catastrophic defeat. In 1768, the Cossacks led yet another anti-Polish uprising, called Kalievchina, killing tens of thousands of Poles and Jews who settled Ukraine in the previous centuries. Religious warfare also broke out between two Ukrainian groups. Increasing conflict between the Ruthenian Uniate Church and Orthodox parishes along the newly reinforced Polish-Russian border on the Dnieper eventually led to the uprising. Faith also reflected the opposing Polish, Western Catholic, and Russian, Eastern Orthodox, political allegiances. In the years 1764 to 1781, Catherine the Great incorporated much of central Ukraine into the Russian Empire when the Cossack hetmanate and the Zaporozhian Sich were abolished. After the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 1783, the newly acquired lands, now called Novorossiya, were opened up to settlement by Russians. The Tsarist autocracy established a policy of Russification, suppressing the use of the Ukrainian language and curtailing the Ukrainian national identity. The western part of present-day Ukraine was subsequently split between Russia and Habsburg-ruled Austria after the fall of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795. 19th and early 20th century. Beginning in the 19th century, there was migration from Ukraine to distant areas of the Russian Empire. According to the 1897 census, there were 223,000 ethnic Ukrainians in Siberia and 102,000 in Central Asia. An additional 1.6 million emigrated to the east in the 10 years after the opening of the